The topic, if you're happy for me to continue.
Yes, please continue.
Thank you. Yesterday, the Parliamentary Budget Office gave evidence about the deterioration between PFO, the pre-election economic and fiscal outlook, and MyEFO, the mid-year economic and fiscal outlook. How does the government account for the differences between PFO and MyEFO in terms of the budget deficits?
Senator Richard Windier, Deputy Secretary, Budget Group. I think am I right in thinking that the evidence you're referring to related to the differences over the medium term?
Correct.
In that case, Senator, the questions related to how the medium term is forecast are really questions that is owned by Treasury and are really questions for Treasury rather than questions Finance can answer.
Finance is not responsible for contributing to those forecasts in any way?
Senator, the medium-term forecasts are modelled by and Treasury.
So Finance has no input into, for example, the expenditure side of those forecasts?
Senator, no, it's done by Treasury.
No, so Finance provides no data, no input, not consulted. This is solely Treasury.
On the medium-term outlook, yes. On the forward estimates, knock yourself out.
Okay, I just want to be really clear.
Well, that was like the sixth time.
Yeah, well, let's be absolutely sure, because sometimes it does take follow-up questions. So Finance has no insight into why the budget bottom line has deteriorated by $57 billion over 7 years.
Senator, we don't... they're questions you'd have to put to Treasury to understand what goes into the model, their modelling, and therefore what is presented.
Right. So there are there's no contribution to that deterioration or those changes that have been a result of policy decisions that Finance has any visibility of.
Senator, as I say, I can't because we are not responsible for them and don't know what goes into them. I can't offer any commentary on what might or might not have caused them to move.
Over the medium term.
Yeah.
Certainly there are elements which I think the Treasurer has already alluded to, so the public hospital agreement.
Okay.
And we can go into this more tomorrow, but just in terms of, assisting, because the impact over the medium term is a matter that Treasury is only in a position to answer. Some of the provision that we've made, and we did make a provision for hospitals, also a provision for Henderson Defence Precinct forms part of that. Also provision for the Thriving Kids and foundational supports, which is also a part of the NDIS and some of the agreements at National Cabinet. So they would be probably the big moving pieces.
Right. So it's not purely just forecasts, it is policy decisions taken by government which has contributed to the change between PFO and MyEFO.
Sorry, can you just repeat that?
So it's not just a forecasting change. Policy decisions made between PFO and MyEFO are reflected in those numbers.
I would just have to check on some of that in terms of when decisions were made.
Sure, but you've just given me 3 reasons that have contributed to the different numbers between...
I would just have to check because some of the decision timing matters there.
Well, are you saying because it might have happened after MyEFO or it might have happened before PFO?
I just have to check, Senator Paterson. I just want to check, that's all.
I'm really confused. Help me understand, because you were offering some explanations for the difference between PFO and MyEFO, and you listed 3 items of expenditure: Henderson Defence Precinct, the Health and Hospitals Agreement, Thriving Kids and foundational supports. The only way they could have contributed to the difference between those numbers is if they occurred between PFO and MyEFO.
I just want to be very clear.
That would be helpful if you could.
Yeah.
Can you be?
Well, look, I think it's better it's dealt with in Treasury when they can account for the medium-term impacts. I was just trying to be helpful in saying that there are some things that would impact on those medium-term outlooks.
Yes, and I don't want to discourage you from being helpful in the future, so I don't want to press this too much, but I just do want to understand this process. Is it a purely forecasting exercise, or is it a budget exercise in that when decisions are taken, those numbers are updated?
I think that's a question for Treasury on how they do the medium-term forecast, Senator.
All right, let's get straight into it, because what unfolded this week wasn't just another dry Senate hearing. It was one of those moments where the numbers stop making sense, the answers start slipping, and suddenly everyone's pointing fingers somewhere else. This all kicked off yesterday inside a tense parliamentary committee room where Senator James Paterson started digging into what can only be described as a massive fiscal mystery, a staggering $57 billion blowout in Australia's budget projections, not million, billion, and not over decades, over just 7 years. Now, here's where things start getting messy. Paterson presses officials looking for clarity. Simple question, right? What caused the shift between the government's pre-election outlook and the updated mid-year numbers? Where did $57 billion suddenly appear from? What, and the response? Shrug, deflect, pass it to someone else. Officials from the finance department, led by senior bureaucrats, essentially said, not our lane. According to them, anything beyond the short-term estimates belongs to Treasury. Not their job, not their model, not their responsibility. And just like that, the trail goes cold. But Paterson doesn't let it slide. He keeps pushing again and again, trying to pin down whether this blowout is just economic forecasting or whether it's the result of actual government decisions, policies, spending commitments, real-world choices, and slowly, piece by piece, something starts to emerge. There are hints, just hints, of major spending drivers, hospital funding agreements, defence infrastructure projects like the Henderson Precinct, and expanded social programmes tied to the NDIS. Big ticket items, the kind that don't just quietly slip into a spreadsheet, they reshape it. But here's the twist. Even as those examples are mentioned, officials hesitate, they pull back, they start qualifying their own answers. We'd have to check. That's really for Treasury. We don't have visibility on that. And suddenly, what should be a straightforward explanation turns into a bureaucratic maze. Now, pause for a second and think about this from the outside. You've got ordinary Australians, families dealing with rising rents, fuel costs, grocery bills that seem to climb every week, small business owners juggling wages and overheads, regional communities fighting to keep services alive. And then you've got a $57 billion shift in national finances. And the people responsible for managing it can't clearly explain where it came from. That's where the frustration kicks in. Back in the room, Paterson sharpens the focus. If finance contributes data on policy decisions, even beyond the forward estimates, then surely they should be able to say which decisions are driving this blowout. But again, the answer slips through the cracks. They draw a distinction, technical, almost surgical, between costing policies and forecasting outcomes. Yes, finance helps calculate the cost of decisions, but the broader economic impact? That's Treasury's domain. It's like watching two departments stand on either side of a line, each insisting the real answer lies just beyond their boundary. And this isn't just some inside baseball policy debate. This has real political weight, because just hours ago, reactions started pouring in. Opposition figures seized on the confusion, accusing the government, led by Finance Minister Katy Gallagher, of losing control of the budget narrative. Social media lit up with clips of the exchange, with commentators asking the obvious question, how can you manage a budget you can't fully explain? Meanwhile, government allies push back, arguing that long-term forecasts are inherently complex, shaped by global pressures, economic shifts and evolving policy needs. They say this isn't mismanagement, it's the reality of governing in uncertain times. But that argument only goes so far, because what really hit a nerve was the lack of clarity around timing. Like, were these spending decisions made before the mid-year update? After? Were provisions quietly baked into the numbers before agreements were finalised? At one point, the discussion zeroes in on hospital funding, a massive agreement with the states. Officials confirmed that money was provisioned before the deal was even locked in. Let that sink in. Billions set aside in anticipation of a decision that hadn't yet been finalised. Now, to be fair, that's not unusual in government budgeting. It's called planning ahead. But when those provisions aren't clearly explained or fully accounted for, it starts to look like the numbers are being massaged behind the scenes. And that's where the political temperature really spikes, because this isn't happening in a vacuum. Across Australia this week, there have been growing protests over cost of living pressures. In regional towns, people are calling for more transparency on where taxpayer money is going. Veterans groups are demanding clarity on defence spending. And in major cities, workers are questioning why public services still feel stretched despite record levels of expenditure. Now, layer on top of that a $57 billion discrepancy and no clear, unified explanation. And you've got a recipe for distrust. Internationally, eyes are also watching. Australia's fiscal credibility matters on the global stage, especially with rising interest rates and economic uncertainty across the Indo-Pacific. Analysts overseas are already asking whether this blowout signals deeper structural issues or just a communication breakdown inside government. And back in Canberra, the pressure is building. So, because here's the climactic moment, the point where everything converges. Paterson asks what should be the simplest question of all. Will the upcoming federal budget fully account for these changes? Will Australians finally see the complete picture? And the answer: you'll have to wait for the budget. And that's it. No confirmation, no denial, just a promise that clarity is coming eventually. And that's where we are right now. A $57 billion question mark hanging over the nation's finances, departments deferring to each other, politicians bracing for fallout, and everyday Australians left trying to make sense of it all. So let's bring it home. If the people managing the numbers can't clearly explain them, who can? If massive spending shifts can happen without transparent accountability, what does that mean for trust in the system? And when the budget finally drops, will it answer these questions or just raise new ones? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this one isn't going away anytime soon. Share this with someone who needs to see it. And if you want more breakdowns like this, real talk, no fluff, hit subscribe and stay locked in. Because in Australian politics right now, the numbers aren't just numbers anymore. They're the story.